Setting up to YouTube Live. Welcome, everybody, and happy freaking Wednesday. It is a glorious day here in Washington, D.C. The sun is shining. The birds seem to be chirping. I have been in my house all day, well, my apartment all day, working on my second book and preparing for this wonderful edition of the launch of season 2 of the Real Talk podcast series, the Difference Makers podcast edition, I guess, with none other than Amy Carpenter. If you do not know who I am, hello, my name is Emma G. I'm a singer, songwriter, musician, youth empowerment coordinator, using music and songwriting as tools to empower teenagers to find their voices, find their inner truth, and amplify it to the world, because creativity today keeps the doctor away. And of course, running a podcast series like this, speaking with difference makers like Amy Carpenter. How are you? What is going on? Tell me about yourself.
Oh, I'm well, Emma G. Thank you for asking. It's a glorious day here too. I'm in Rockport, Maine. And
nice.
It's unseasonably sunny. My cat is actually out on the front deck in the sun, which for March is very rare. So yeah, we're enjoying the good weather here too.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like, I feel like just a week ago, it was 27 degrees here in DC. I don't know what it was like in Maine, but my goodness.
Yeah, I think we hit single digits as recently as last week. So this is really crazy. Yeah.
I mean, Maine definitely gets cold. Yeah. Definitely gets cold. I remember seeing my first ever moose, my only moose actually, when I was in Maine. So there we go. That's cool. So
lucky you. Some people who live here never see one. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, then I lucked out. There we go. So tell me, who are you? What is your why? Do you like apples? What is tell me about who Amy Carpenter is.
Okay, so I'm a psychotherapist and an author, and I recently completed 2 books in my Be Strong, Be Wise series. And the books focus on helping teenagers and young adults talk about sexual assault awareness and personal safety in a way that helps them feel more confident rather than afraid. So I'm really excited. There's been a lot of opportunity to talk to schools and youth organizations and just try and create a new level of openness around talking about something that's been so uncomfortable and scary. And the more that we're uncomfortable and scared, the less we talk about things. So I really feel it kind of my personal mission to try and push the needle on this issue in discussing sexual ethics with teenagers in general.
I love that mission. I think it's such an important one, especially given, and this is new to me because I'm not originally from the States, but I wasn't aware of how different education around sexual identity, sexual health was in this country, depending on which state you lived in. What got you involved in this specific area of sexual health or youth work, really?
Well, I've always been a youth advocate throughout my career. I actually started out in child welfare, back 25 years ago or so, and went to grad school and got extra training in family systems and have worked as a family therapist and a school-based counselor. But really, the bulk of my career in the past 10 or 15 years has been focused on working with women. And because I primarily work with women, I work with a lot of assault survivors. So I was doing my thing and, counseling folks, and was seeing my clients who had been struggling with their own experience of victim blaming and shame and holding their own secrets inside, and really trying to work their way through sharing that truth in therapy. And on the heels of the Me Too movement, which was not that long ago, if we think about it, and it's still alive and well, running out of Harlem with Tarana Burke. On the heels of the Me Too movement, I saw my clients have so much hope and buoyancy and, just this kind of optic feeling that everything that they'd been struggling with was now, the doors had been busted open and people were talking about it. And then really quickly on the heels of that, the Kavanaugh hearing took place. And I saw the hope that had been building in my clients just get crushed. And it was a time of despair. It was a time of difficulty. And I know that people fall on different sides of the fence around the results of that hearing. Personally, I was also devastated by it. So it was in this aftermath that I started working on an article around the effects of sexual trauma on the developing brain. Because sexual assault primarily happens in young adulthood, at least 50% of assaults occur between the ages of 18 and 34. And we know that young people, especially in high school, college freshmen, are just, not as aware, not as well informed as they could be around how to approach prevention differently. And I talk about all sexes when I say this. This is not just a woman's issue. So I was writing this article, and in the midst of writing it, something horrible happened in that my own daughter was assaulted. And this was at a church soup kitchen nearby. It was a very well-staffed event. She was there volunteering with the National Honor Society. There were teachers, there was a priest, there were other attendees, and still the perpetrator found a way to lure her into another room where he touched her inappropriately. So that was when the tables turned for me. And I realized that I understood assault. I'm a survivor myself. I understood assault from the lens of a survivor and a healer, but I had never understood it from the lens of a parent. And that's when I realized I've been spending enough time in my career focusing on prevention, or rather response, and perhaps it's time to focus on prevention, and the rest is history. So it was a lot of different forces working together. But I realized through that difficult story with my daughter, and by the way, she took all the right steps. The perpetrator was caught. The school ended up changing their system around volunteering. The church took accountability, like all the good things happened. But for me as a parent, it was really hard to let go of the frustration and disempowerment of not being able to do anything about it. So that's why I feel really strongly that while there are assaults that are not preventable, there are assaults that are, and it's a hard double truth. It's a really hard double truth. And I work with people who struggle with victim blaming. So we can't forget that when we think about prevention.
I think it's really powerful being able to take, your own experiences, lean into those experiences, and then come up with something as beneficial for the entire community as you've done. I think there are many women, myself included, and I sing about it, who have really, struggled with sexual trauma, domestic trauma, or just, various forms of abuse that we are often told to sit down, be quiet, look pretty, and carry on with our lives as if nothing ever happened. I'm curious as to know what gave you the strength. Was this something you were passionate about getting involved with before, your daughter's, and I'm so sorry to hear about it, before your daughter's experience, or was this something that was always like in your soul, in your gut, about wanting to make a difference?
I don't think it was a conscious decision along the way. I really feel like I was led. I feel like there were messages I was getting when, as I said, when the Kavanaugh hearing took place and my clients were struggling so much, and I was calling our local sexual assault response hotline and finding out from them, like, how are you helping people at this time? And can you give me any feedback? And they had received 5 times their call volume the week after the hearing. So I knew that my experience wasn't an isolated one. And we as a country, and I would say the world as well, but I really focus on the US in my book, we have not addressed this issue nearly enough. And because as parents and as caring adults, we have our own discomfort. And I had to come face to face with that as a parent who works in the field. And I still had to come face to face with where I believe I really failed my daughter in not teaching her that there are people who have ulterior motives when it comes to being friendly and nice. And, it was almost shocking to me that here I am counseling people And I didn't see that in my own parenting. So to answer your question, I don't think it was a conscious decision. I was getting messages, I was getting signs. I'm a big believer in signs and messages, and and feeling connected to kind of the higher creative order of things, and just trying to be kind of a messenger in the midst of a lot of confusion. So I feel really blessed that I do have this kind of wheelhouse, this body of knowledge, this body of experience as a youth advocate, as a relationship coach, and as a psychotherapist. So I feel like, why not me? Why not me? Why not step up and try and talk about this in a new way? So I really try, with this strength and empowerment perspective that I totally align with what you just said. I try and bring this, it's really a curriculum. There are 5 classes that the book addresses and talks about. And in the course of the process, young people, by going through the curriculum, end up learning about themselves. And to me, that's one of the most important gifts that we can give the next generation, is self-knowledge and self-awareness. And that comes into play with boundaries and communication style, but it also comes into play with just, how touch is experienced, how physical space is experienced, and how in relationships one can really know how to listen to your gut and your intuition in order to, avoid the kind of choices that end up hurting you.
I love that. I think, it's one of the things that most impresses me about what you're doing is almost a taboo subject, right? Being able to speak openly and honestly and with respect and with, I don't know, reverence, maybe, with our young people, empowering them with skills that we so often shy away from sharing. We I think as a Western society tend to blanket our young people as long as we can, keep them as young as we can, to with the hopes that will protect them, that will enable them to fully grow up before they have to grow up. And I don't know about you, but my first sexual assault was at the age of 5, and I was raped for the first time when I was 12. And I speak very candidly about that because that's one of the reasons why I personally got into writing music, because I needed something to channel my voice through in a way that wasn't self-harming. And obviously Kavanaugh's, the drama since Kavanaugh and the last 4 years have been incredibly tumultuous for many people. I'm curious as to how you have, your focus is on America, but how you manage to connect with these communities and these people who are at risk, not just specifically during the pandemic, but further, and maybe this is a slightly awkward question, but different cultures within America have approach the topic of sexual safety very differently. So I'm wondering, not just how are you changing your approach during the pandemic, but how do you change your approach depending on what kind of community you're specifically working with, if you know what I mean?
Yes. Well, that's a great question. You may know, Emma G, but I live in one of the whitest states in the country. And, that's a challenge living here. And so my exposure really has been with the gifts of the internet and being able to do online classes, which COVID has required. And in that sense, for me, as far as spreading the word around this book and these classes, being able to use technology has been a super gift. As far as working with other cultures, I talk a lot about this a lot in my second book. which is for caring adults such as parents, teachers, and counselors who want to give the curriculum to their young people. And the demographic most at risk of sexual assault are Black women. And there is a history behind that that is as old as this country, and isn't given enough, space to talk about, acknowledgement, how racism shows up as far as sexual violence. Well, it shows up everywhere. The cross section between racism and sexual violence is huge. So that could be in and of itself its own book. But I approach it with a lot of reverence. I'm a person of privilege as a white female. I identify as heterosexual, so I'm privileged there as well. And in my second book, when I talk about racism and sexual violence, and when I talk about the needs of the non-binary and LGBTQ community and sexual violence, I really rely very heavily on other voices, not my own. I do a lot of research when I write. I'm kind of a research hound, so I was lucky to come across some great articles written by, one was an Asian woman, a Latina woman, and an African-American woman. And they gave great feedback around the particulars of their own culture and how sexual violence is very different depending on your cultural makeup and where you reside and where you live. And as far as the LGBTQ community, the same thing. And there's a whole world of experience that, privileged heterosexual people, we're just not aware of, because it's not something that we're living in a daily reality. Whereas people who are victims of racism, for example, live it every day. So I guess in answer to your question, which that's a long way of answering it, I approach it with a lot of humility and a lot of seeking other wisdom.
I love that so much. And I recognize that was maybe a very loaded question. So thank you for humoring it. It's just,
I hope I answered it.
I think it did beautifully. What I heard was that you use your privilege to research and empower yourself with knowledge so that you can empower others with knowledge. And, you have a way of being able to come at it from different viewpoints. And I think that's really valuable, because often when we're in our sub-communities, we live in echo chambers that tend to repeat our own rhetoric back to us. And I think being able to, you're a licensed professional, you've been doing this work for a long time, so you know the value of how, I forget the term right now, but how self-reflection is an important skill, but also how there's value in different approaches to matters. But being able to use your position of privilege, and we're all privileged in some way, shape, or form, but being able to use your privilege to expand and to push back against some of the negative self-talk that people have can be really beneficial.
Thank you.
You're nodding. I'm like, am I paraphrasing?
I appreciate that. That's good feedback. Yeah, thank you.
No, of course. And this is, coming from somebody who, I was raised with a counselor for a mother, and, that's one of the reasons why I got into teaching and youth work in the first place, was because I wanted to also help people. So, you do fantastic work in a very taboo appearing subject. So I'm wondering, when it comes to your work, because, Be Strong, Be Wise is something that you're so passionate about when it comes to empowering parents to help their young people. Is there a way that you can, or that we can all sort of help step up to the plate and help you in your mission? How can we all, whether we're parents or not, do our part in empowering young people to learn more about their sexual selves and the safety that we need to implement around sexuality, and with beyond just saying to women, keep your legs closed. There's so many, I think, and this is just me, me venting, but, we live in an age where we're told boys to carry on being boys and girls to just navigate their actions to appease those of boys. But is there anything that you feel that society can do to help you in your mission to making young people, building a next generation of young people who are on a more even playing field and can take ownership of their learning and development?
That's a great question. And there are several ways I'll answer it because there are several things that come to mind. Um, well, number one, I obviously love talking about this. I feel really passionate about it. So I welcome anybody who wants to reach out to me. My website is bestrong.com. And there's an easy link to follow to get a hold of me. I am happy to talk about this anytime. I read the book, get the book. The book has loads of information in it. But I think as far as in your own life, listeners in their own life, don't be afraid to talk about it. There's so much that we don't know. And really, frankly, the people that are supposed to know don't know, because I think of the 50 states in the US, only 10 require that sex education be done in a medically accurate format. And we're not even talking about sexual assault prevention. This is just like the birds and the bees kind of stuff. Only 10 states do it in a medically accurate fashion. So
that's wild.
It's wild. I was shocked when I read that. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier, which was so profound. We, and I include myself in the we, are raising our children in a child-centered paradigm primarily. And I talk about this in my second book as well. And child-centered parenting is wonderful. It's way better than parenting of old. And we struggle with making our kids uncomfortable. So we avoid making our kids uncomfortable. And consequently, and I know that this is a hard truth, and I lived it, so I'm going to own it. Because we don't want to make them or ourselves uncomfortable, we're actually placing them at risk. So we got to figure out how to talk about it. There's so many things that are still in the shadows. Boys in middle school are assaulted at almost the same rate as girls. And I've heard recently, and this broke my heart, I heard recently that a school was teaching basically some version of sexual safety education in the middle school. And the boys in the class came home and said, well, we were just told that because we're boys, we're probably going to want to assault girls. So we just have to be really careful we don't, which is mind-boggling. And I'm sure that that's not exactly what the teacher said. I'm sure that's not what the teacher said. That's certainly what they heard. And it was a really difficult aftermath for these young men that I'm referencing. So we've got a lot of ground to cover in not shaming men, not blaming women, and women are still primarily victims. 90% of assault victims are women. So I'm not saying that this is not a gender equality issue, because I think it's one of the biggest gender equality issues of our time. And if we don't address it, we address it at our peril, along with racism and everything else we're trying to struggle with right now. So as far as talking about it, getting informed, there's a lot of articles. I definitely encourage you to read my books, but there are other books. Peggy Orenstein wrote Boys and Sex and Girls and Sex. They're both New York Times bestsellers. She interviewed more than 70 young women for her first book and young men for her second book. It's all accounts from teenagers themselves, and it is mind-blowing. What pornography, what the media, what sex in our culture is being translated to in relationships with teenagers is, I read the book while I was on a writing retreat. I read it in a week, and I had to fight back the urge to either cry or throw up every time I picked it up. So it's just not what we think of as being young. Thinking that sex is about violence, about strangling your girlfriend as you're having sex with her. These are things that the teenagers are seeing in pornography and in other places. So it's becoming a bit normal. Girls are understanding that it's their job to acquiesce to a lot of rough sex, and boys are seeing it as their job to be rough. So I'm obviously painting kind of a gross generalization here, but this is based on research. It's based on interviews, and it's based on what young people are saying. So, again, there's a kind of a perfect storm brewing that we need to deal with, and that is that teenagers are more savvy on technology than we are. And I'm speaking about my generation. I'm just a little bit older than you, Emoji.
Not by much.
Of course, not by much. But teenagers are more savvy than we are. Most parents are on their phones, and we know it. So, and they can get their way around parental control devices.
Well, in that case, I'm definitely I'm still
Yeah. So there's a level at which there's this whole world they're getting exposed to, and we don't even know what that is. So there's this kind of underlayer of discomfort and fear anyway. Then you add child-centered parenting with all its wonderful parts. The not so wonderful parts are that we don't want to make our kids uncomfortable. So we avoid the very things that are making us uncomfortable too. So I think for people trying to, step up and be good parents, we all want to be good parents, the intentions are so solid, but start by being comfortable with the uncomfortable and dancing there for a bit, because it's going to be uncomfortable. And you can have these conversations with teenagers in short, casual bits, starting perhaps with the definition of sexual assault, which you can look up on the legal dictionary. A lot of people don't know just how broad the definition is. And talk about that as a family. Talk about a story from the news. Talk about an event from school, and begin to create, this is what I try to do in my books, begin to create an inner dialogue that teenager can have with themselves around what feels right for them. What would they say if they're uncomfortable? That's another great conversation to have. Most young people, when I've taught classes in the local high school here and in other places, most young people don't know what they would say if they're in an uncomfortable situation. And that's where we as adults need to help them, give them the language, practice it, come up with even just one line, like "I'm out of here," is completely sufficient to getting somebody from an awkward situation to something that feels more stable. So, and I know that I said this before, I just want to reiterate that it's a very, I was talking to a counselor at a high school recently, and she said, well, what I tell my students is assault just happens. And there's nothing we can do about it. It just happens. And I had to lean in and I said, I don't align with that. Assault does, in your story and my story, I was assaulted as a child as well. That is a situation where there is zero responsibility. I use my daughter's story, and she's not at fault. The offender is 100% at fault, as offenders always are. The victim is never at fault. However, there were 20 faculty there, 15 students, a supervising priest who could have prevented that from happening. So bystander awareness is a huge part of the conversations that we need to be having with our young people. And, giving teens the ability to say no, to say I'm uncomfortable. 80% of assaults happen with a known offender. And usually we're talking about a date. I mean, when I hear assaults, and I hear a lot of stories, I've heard hundreds, it's often there's a breakup, and there's alone together somewhere, and somebody crosses a line and an assault takes place. So giving young people the power of human agency with their own inner authority and the voice to communicate their boundaries is one of the biggest gifts that we can give them.
I love that. And I think that is such an important, this is why we're friends.
I love you too.
No, you're completely right. Like empowering people to say no, empowering people to speak up when they see something that isn't right, and empowering both young men and women to own their actions. It breaks my heart that we're teaching our young boys that these are the roles that they need to step into. And even without them realizing it, it breaks my heart that young girls, young women are, learning that they need to take it. And, it is what it is, I think is some of the worst words anyone ever muttered, because it is what it is, totally disempowers us from being able to take action. And you are doing a phenomenal job at actually taking those negative messages and disempowering messages and turning them into something that we can actually take action on as a community, as a society, as a world. So thank you so much. That brings us to the end of all we have time for, unfortunately, today. However, there is so much more that you have to give. There's so many more lessons that we can learn from you, and so much more wisdom you have to share. If you are interested in hearing more from Amy Carpenter, learning more about how you can empower your child and yourself with the necessary tools, skills, and abilities to, be healthier in the realm of sexual safety, bestrongbeWise.com, I believe, is your website. Is that correct?
Yep.
Look at me. I know things. That's fantastic. Is there anything else that you want to sort of empower people with today before we get going?
Oh gosh, I mean, I just think that when we can get past that initial stage of fear, it actually it can be a really connecting opportunity and a really exciting opportunity to have these kinds of conversations, and even share a bit of our own story where it feels appropriate. The experience that I've had with young people is that they're actually hungry to have these conversations. Peggy Ornstein, when she wrote her book, she found that 60% of boys had never had a conversation with their family members around how to be respectful, how to, not use sexist slurs with women. They had never had a conversation at home around sexual safety. So we've got a lot that we can empower our young men with, as what I call being a champion of, how do you show up with that beautiful masculine energy as a protective force when the need arises. There's a lot of opportunity here, a lot of hope. I think once we get started, it's actually empowering for us as it is for our young people. And it's a good skill for them to have in general, to separate themselves from the noise in our culture and figure out who they are. And this is just one topic that allows them to dig a little deeper there.
And I love that you refer to them as champions, because I'm all about that life. No matter how uncomfortable you get, no matter how bizarre the world seems, champions make adjustments, and that adjustment can start today by having a conversation that's open, honest, loving, and trustworthy with your child. I love that. Love, love, love. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. You're amazing. You have so much to give to the world, and I'm just so blessed and honored to know you and to be working with you. For anybody who's watching again, keep in touch with Amy, bestrongbeWise.com. Grab a copy of one or two of her books, because she's constantly writing them, because she's a goddess. Let's be real. And we can start to change the world positively by having these conversations out, however uncomfortable they are. The comfort zone, nothing ever happens in the comfort zone. Growth happens when you start to get uncomfortable, and little by little we can start programming the direction that we are going in as a society. Thank you so much, Amy. You're amazing. And everybody else who's watching today, of course, have an amazing day on purpose. Spread love like it's going out of fashion. Be your own kind of superhero. And don't forget to wear sunscreen. Spring